Let's say a blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nitanu b'torah la'asuk b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord of God, rule of the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and command us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. All right, let's get started. Brenda, would you read our L'cha Dodi on 1 foot, please?
L'cha Dodi on 1 foot. L'cha Dodi is a prayer in the first part of the Friday evening service, the Kabbalat Shabbat part. It follows 6 psalms representing the 6 days of creation. It was written in 1529 by Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz in Safat. It is about greeting Shabbat, applying the metaphor of Shabbat as a bride. According to Jewish worship, written by Abraham Milgram in 1971, historical background of L'cha Dodi.
Thank you. Very good. All right, so that's a little asterisk that 1529 as a date for L'cha Dodi is according to this book that I found when I was on vacation. All right, Abba, would you read the historical background of L'cha Dodi, please, both the text and then the thing after it? You might be on mute.
Okay, take 2. Rabbi Hanina would wrap himself in his garment and stand at nightfall on Shabbat Eve and say, "Come, we will go out to greet Shabbat the Queen." Rabbi Yanai put on his garment on Shabbat Eve and said, "Enter, O bride, enter, O bride." Parenthetical reaction to that stuff in the Talmud. Maybe. However, back to more scholarly stuff. Between 1492 and 1529, Jews were kicked out of Spain, Portugal, Nuremberg, Bavaria, Papal States, Milan, and Naples. Then, in 1520, Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire conquered Egypt and the land of Israel from the Mamelukes. This led to a population explosion in Safat, otherwise known as Safed, as Jews from all over came to the city in the Galilee, near Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's grave in Meron. Among those who gathered there was the Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari. Around him gathered other Kabbalists, such as Rabbi Joseph Caro, author of the Shulchan Aruch, Eliezer Azikri, author of Yedid Nefesh, and Moshe Cordovero, who was the leading Kabbalist before Isaac Luria, and his brother-in-law Shlomo Alkabetz. They would all go out into the fields at dusk on Friday, singing psalms and songs to welcome Shabbat, a custom that spread to other communities. But elsewhere was done inside the synagogue just before Mariv or Arvit. Inspired by the text in the Babylonian Talmud that we read up above, Shlomo Alkabetz wrote L'cha Dodi as the centerpiece for, and you're going to have to move the screen down, thank you, as the centerpiece for this new service, Kabbalat Shabbat, Receiving the Sabbath, which the Kabbalists had just invented. He wrote it as an acrostic using his name for the first stage stanzas, Shlomo HaLevi. Kabbalat Shabbat became the last universally accepted addition to Jewish liturgy. And the personal parenthetic note is I have been in the house of the Ari in Safat and walked out the western gateway to look over the mountains of the rest of the Galilee at sunset and seeing exactly what that experience was that inspired this whole bunch of Kabbalists to do this.
I was thinking the same thing in June. We were strolling through the streets.
Cool. All right, so before we get to L'cha Dodi itself, are there questions about the background of L'cha Dodi, how it came to be?
I just wanted to comment about how late that is. We, under the impression that our liturgy is very old and a lot older than that and frozen in time and space. And so I was just surprised at the fact that a prayer in the early 1500s would become, well, I guess it's a prayer and a service, would become established and, something that we do every week.
Yep.
David? So, I mean, L'cha Dodi obviously is the, kind of the climax of Kabbalat Shabbat, but was this also the time that the Psalms that precede Kabbalat Shabbat started? Because before this, did they just jump right into Baruch Hu with Mariv, or how did the other little Psalms that surround L'cha Dodi, how did they fit into that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the structure of Kabbalat Shabbat is that often there's a introductory prayer called Yadid Nefesh, written by one of these other Kabbalists, Elazar Zikri. And then there's a set of Psalms, which I want to say is like Psalm 93 through 99, maybe? Something like that. And then L'cha Dodi, and then Psalm 29, Psalm 29, then L'cha Dodi, then Psalm 92, which is the Psalm for Shabbat, and Psalm 93, which is the Psalm for Friday, dating back to the time of the temple when the Levites would sing a psalm for each day of the week. So the Psalms are very old, but the custom of putting the Psalms in as part of this ritual to welcome in Shabbat dates back to this time in the 1500s in Tzfat from the Kabbalists. Before that, they would just start with Mariv or Arvit with Baruch Hu and go on from there. Good question. Other questions about the background of L'cha Dodi or Kabbalat Shabbat?
David, it's not really a question. It's just a comment. Now my favorite part of the service is Ana B'Koach, which comes right before L'cha Dodi. Just and some shuls do it, some shuls don't. Sometimes the same shul switches on and off. And I'm always so excited to have it. I thought I would share my virtual background that I put up whenever at the service the person leading starts Ana B'Koach.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Yes, Ana B'Koach is a Kabbalistic mystical text that some synagogues do before L'cha Dodi, some do not. There are 2 or 3 main tunes for it, but it's a short text that has a lot of mystical significance to it. Thank you for reminding me about that. Other comments or questions? All right, let's jump in. We'll see how far we can get into the 9 verses this week. Don, would you read the refrain in English and the text about it?
Come, my beloved friend, to welcome the bride. Let us greet Shabbat as she arrives. This is the refrain of L'cha Dodi, happening at the beginning and then again after each of the 9 verses. The phrase L'cha Dodi comes from Song of Songs, chapter 7, verse 12. The rest of the refrain is based on phrases from Shabbat 119a2. The idea of the Jewish people being wedded to Shabbat comes from Genesis Rabbah 11:8. In the Midrash, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakiah, aka Reish Lakish, imagined Shabbat as complaining to God that the other 6 days of the week have a partner, 1 with 2 or 1 with 4, 3 with 4, or 3 with 6, and so forth. But Shabbat has no partner. So God promises that the Jewish people will be the partner of Shabbat. Additionally, the fourth commandment says to remember Shabbat and keep it holy. But the word for keep it holy, l'cha, is similar to the word for the marriage ceremony, kiddushim, thus reinforcing the idea of Shabbat as the bride of the Jewish people. The first half of the refrain has 15 letters, while the second half has 11 letters. This is equal to the numeric value of the 4 letters in God's name, Yud, then Hey, then Vav, then another Hey. What would it look like if we considered each person at Friday evening services to be a beloved friend?
Thank you, Don.
Would be a happy place.
David,
Yeah.
comment on the question. When I used to daven at a synagogue in Boston for Kabbalat Shabbat, they had a custom of welcoming right the last verse of Bo Shalom, mourners, people who had sat Shiva for the week and came to Shul the first Friday after Shiva for these services. And they were welcomed into the synagogue as a custom for having finished Shiva and not coming back into the community with the last verse of L'cha Dodi. What does that connect with historically, or does it?
Yeah, so there is a custom that mourners, or there's a recognition that people who are in mourning may not feel the joy of Shabbat or the happiness that everybody else is feeling as Shabbat is coming in. And so the custom developed that people who are in that week of mourning don't come into the sanctuary until after L'cha Dodi, until after Shabbat has entered. And then the community greets them with the phrase said when greeting mourners in general, Hamakom Yinachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar Avei Tzion B'Yerushalayim. May the Holy One comfort you amongst the mourners of Zion in Jerusalem. Some synagogues will proactively say that at the end of L'cha Dodi, out of a recognition that they don't know who is mourning somebody, particularly in an age when many synagogues have online services. And so even if clergy know who is in the room and they think they know everything about those people's personal lives, as far as who might have lost somebody, there's no way of knowing who's tuning in on Zoom, on Facebook, on the website, on YouTube, however synagogue offers their online services options. So some synagogues will say, like, we'll say this preemptively, and then if they know of somebody, if the clergy know of somebody in the community that lost a loved one within the past week, they'll say, we recognize that, you know, there may be those who are not feeling the full joy of Shabbat, and in particular, we are thinking of so-and-so. And this then also serves as a function to tell the rest of the community, heads up, this family or this individual lost somebody and they could use some support. So different synagogues handle it differently, but that is the why and the how of the custom of mourners not coming in until after L'cha Dodi is over. So does that answer your question, Hinda?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
David?
Yeah.
If it's okay, since you're taking L'cha Dodi questions, I thought of another one when you were talking. May I ask you?
Sure.
That's a good time. So, and I know different synagogues do different things, even within the conservative movement, but at least my childhood synagogue, on the Amidah, the bow was always first to the left on all Amidah. And what I learned as a child is the only time one bows to the right is L'cha Dodi, and it's because one of the and versus, I don't remember right now, I think it's a penultimate, not the ultimate. It actually says from the right and the left in the Hebrew. So is that, and I realize you may not know, putting you on the spot, but is that unusual that because I've been places where I can see even on L'cha Dodi that people are doing what they do in Amidah, they bow left first and then right, but at least my childhood shul, that was the one exception to do right then left.
Yeah, my experience is that it is left and then right. Incidentally, the one time that I've been taught that it's right and then left is during the priestly blessing, that you bow on the first line you bow right, the second line you bow left, the third line you bow center, always making sure that you're standing up straight when you say God's name. But I could see why the custom might have developed, because as we will see later on this evening, in the 8th verse, the penultimate one, it does say, Yamin usmol tifrotzi, right and left, you shall expand your borders. But thank you for sharing that custom. All right, let's move on. Gary, would you read about our first verse, please?
Observe and remember.
Yep.
Were uttered as one. We heard it thus from the singular one. God's name is one and God is one, renowned with honor and deserving of praise. Context. This first verse of L'cha Dodi is based on the conundrum that in the first version of the Ten Commandments, it says Zachor, remember the Sabbath day. While in the second version, it says Shamor, observe the Sabbath day. Modern scholars chalk that up to two different textual traditions, but the rabbis of the Talmud solved it differently. They said that Zachor and Shamor were said Bidibur Echad in
Nice.
one utterance. And in fact, they do sound somewhat similar. The phrase from Shavuot 20b9 and Rosh Hashanah 27a2 and Rashi on Exodus 28 became the basis for this version of L'cha Dodi.
Yeah.
You want to keep going?
Please. Yep. Yes, please.
The Kabbalists also took this idea and instituted lighting 2 Shabbat candles that together cast one light. Ibn Gikatalia, Sha'ari Ora 136, Rabbi Yaakov Landau, Seder Agur, Reuven Kimmelman, page 3741. They also noticed that Zachor, remember, sounds like Zachar, male, while Shamor, observe, starts with the same letter as Shechniah, the divine presence, thought to be God's female side. Thus, for the Kabbalists, Shabbat represented a uniting of God's various facets. The phrase L'shem Olferet Velitala comes from Jeremiah 13:11 and can also be found paraphrased in Deuteronomy 26:19. When have you said one thing and somebody else thought you said something different?
Thank you.
The time.
Well, the answer to your question I'm not thinking so much about saying, where I have said one thing, but kind of given the state of my hearing these days, it happens all the time where somebody says something and I hear something completely different, which is why I'm going to be going to look for hearing aids soon. But I do have a question about what's up there in the first paragraph, and whenever I can say it, I'm sorry, the paragraph about the Shamor and Zachor, and
The one that's on the screen now?
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just, it just seems like it's such a stretch. But I guess the rabbis often made great stretches. I mean, they're not saying God's male half and God's female half, or male presence and female presence. But the word for male and the female presence, and it's the word, but the first letter. It just seems like such a stretch.
Yes, the many people find that the connections that the Kabbalists make in particular are a stretch, and others find that some of the connections that the rabbis who are not Kabbalists make is also a stretch. Different
Okay.
people find different levels of meaning in these sorts of things. All right, other experiences when you have said one thing and somebody else thought you said something different?
For me, it happens very frequently, and not necessarily because of the cuteness of my hearing, but just in the course of doing business or going through some activities when you're exchanging information, and people sometimes want to hear what they think they want to hear that may be more favorable to their viewpoint or their ends rather than what my intention was, or vice versa. So that or there's just difference in what the meaning of the word. Some people understand it differently, and I've worked in different parts of the country, and in different vocabularies and usage varies. So I don't know if I mentioned that here in New England, you can say that somebody is wicked. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily evil, but that they're very sharp, they're very smart. And I didn't quite understand that when I first came out here.
Yeah, I bet.
And other examples, and I could certain words, and I know in different countries in Latin America are acceptable and polite, and in other countries they're totally vulgar and insulting, without getting into details. I mean, just the names of vegetables sometimes can lead to problems if you're in the wrong place.
Charles, in the South, bless your heart doesn't necessarily mean to bless your heart. So.
Yeah, right.
Yes. I remember once I happened to park my automobile close to our institute, and there was a very long time ago. And there was someone who was pulling in just behind me, and they said, "God bless you." But he was very angry that I happened to find that space. And I didn't quite realize he was also trying to find it. And I was backing in, and I got to it a second or two. Who knows? So. But it's very delicate, that type of thing sometimes. And so then sometimes it's good to reconfirm with other words, paraphrase something to avoid, because sometimes you can just hurt people's feelings.
Well, that's
Without
what's
even
wrong
knowing
with
it.
sending emails, Charles, and text. Sometimes you say things, in a text or an email, and people totally misinterpret what you mean.
Yes.
In terms of emails or text messages, I learned from one of my granddaughters that when you write things correctly with capital letters and periods and such, among the young people, it's considered to be very aggressive.
Yes.
And they write with lowercase only and no punctuation.
That's interesting. Huh. I have to remember that. Thank you.
Yes. I advised someone who was working for me, who was rather new to emailing and not to practice the same thing. I said, why? Be careful. I'm not angry, but you're writing this all in capital letters, and some people will seem to sense that that's the email way of raising your voice. I said, oh, no, I didn't mean it. I'm sure you didn't, but just as a word of advice for future use with other folks. So, yeah.
So Naomi, you're saying that the younger people have adopted the ways of our scribes when they wrote the Torah with no capitalization and no punctuation.
Funny.
I just call it laziness.
Right.
That's a generational difference.
But it's also, speaking as a disabled person who's been on bed rest since the 18th of June, when you're typing one-handed, doing uppercase is just forget it. You don't want to put on caps lock because that angry thing. So that's interesting. Might be two ends of the spectrum. Youngins, well, I don't do text, but youngins, I'd never heard that before about all lowercase is now considered more polite. Or maybe polite doesn't matter, just more trendy.
You have to realize if you're dealing with text or email, you're not seeing the person. So therefore, things might seem a little more raw, if you will. So that's why I think people hold on to I've heard that uppercase, like yelling at somebody. I learned this about the punctuation. That's interesting. And I think it's very interesting that some young person that texts all the time, doesn't have any etiquette, would be in the same category as a Torah scribe. I get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny. But I guess you can interpret anyway. But again, because you lose the face-to-face and the nonverbal and all of that, the eye contact, when you use these methods, then I think it's prone to more interpretation, I guess, more bias.
All right, let's go on. Carol, would you read our second verse, please?
No.
Okay, good. Carol, we can't hear you. Okay.
Speaking to me? Oh, no.
All right. Carol, do you want to try again, or we'll get you another? We'll try another week. Okay. Let's see. Charles, would you read the second verse, please?
It starts with 22.
Yes.
Let us go out to greet Shabbat, source of blessing, conceived at the beginning of time, finally formed at the end of 6 days. Context. This is the second verse of L'cha Dodi. It is based on Isaiah 46:10, where God says that everything Hashem was going to do has been planned out. From this, the Kabbalists developed the idea of Shabbat as having been part of the blueprint of creation, even though it didn't come until the seventh day. The phrase L'chu v'nechlach comes from 1 Samuel 9:9 and Isaiah 2:5, while Merosh Mekedem comes from Proverbs 8:23. There is an allusion to the Kabbalist custom of going out into the fields to greet Shabbat. In what way has Shabbat been a source of blessing for you?
Thank you, Charles.
For me, Shabbat has been so wonderful now since we're able to return back to the synagogue on Saturday morning and see the last 2 or 3 Shabbats have been 30 and 35 people, and we've sat down afterwards and had a small kiddush, and it's just felt really wonderful again to be with our community.
Yeah. I think for myself and my family, it's been a blessing because it's kept our family together and communicating since we had our family, started our family. It's that they're very, and I see it in my children as well, particularly my daughters and my son during the virus. He was the one who initiated Friday night Zoom calls to welcome the Shabbat, and I was surprised because he's not. He has strong identity as a Jew, but not necessarily in practicing the rituals regularly. So, and even this today, even though he's not doing it, my youngest daughter it's in DC will make sure we're on FaceTime with her and our youngest grandchildren to light the candles to welcome Shabbat. So that's something that's been important for us as a blessing to keep the family together. And over the years, I found Saturdays a welcome respite many times from the tension and the chaos of just the working world sometimes, to be able to sit in the synagogue and follow the prayers and the readings.
I think of it as a time to be able to slow down, take a deep breath, more than one deep breath, and to reflect. That during the week, we don't have so much time to reflect. We're always chasing around someplace. And it's a day where you can just sit and look around and appreciate what's around you.
All right, let's go on to our next text. All right. Norma, would you read this, please?
Me?
Carolyn, yes, please.
Okay. Shrine of our sovereign royal city, rise up. Come forth from upheaval and fear no more. End your dwelling in the tear-filled valley, for with God's compassion, you will be upraised. Context. This is the 3rd verse of L'cha Dodi. The words switch from talking about Shabbat to talking about Jerusalem here. The imagery drawn from the book of L'cha is that Jerusalem has been sitting Shiva and now needs to rise. The phrase Yachmol alayich comes from Jeremiah 15:5, when you have come forth from upheaval.
Thank you. When have you come forth from upheaval?
Almost every day. There seems always to be something that
Right.
takes you aside from the moment
Too many
of pleasure
times.
you're in, or the thing you're trying to go to that's pleasurable, and you have to, well, just dealing with the computer on a daily basis is my demon. So
3 years ago, the man who lives upstairs of us for the 2nd time had his ice maker overflow, and destroyed our entire ceilings all the way across, and we had to move out for 2 months and live someplace else. And I'll tell you, that was real upheaval while they fixed the ceilings and the walls and everything. So,
Yeah.
and we came forth back to our place.
I think if you can come through things that are distracting or disturbing and have a smile on your face and a song in your heart and be thankful to God, it's just a good thing. And that's what keeps me going on a daily basis. So.
Yeah. All right, Tybal, would you read our next text, please?
From 27?
Yep.
Awake, rise up from the dust, dress yourself in garments of glory. By the hand of Jesse, son of Bethlehem's tribe, bring my redemption without further delays. Context, this is the 4th verse of L'cha Dodi. Covering oneself in dust and shabby clothing is a sign of mourning, such as what Mordechai did when he heard the extermination decree in Esther chapter 14, verse 1. The phrase Hitna'ari me'afar kumi comes from Isaiah chapter 52, verse 2, while livshi bigday tifarti or tifartech, I don't remember. Tifartech comes from Isaiah chapter 52, 1, where Jerusalem is told to stop mourning, presumably for her lost children. These verses are part of the Haftarah for Parshat Shoftim, one of the Haftaros of consolation between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah.
Okay.
Although this verse is about Jerusalem, it can also be thought of as relating to Shabbos, with the idea that regardless of how bad the week was, we can leave it aside as we step into the palace of time of Shabbat, to borrow Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's language in The Sabbath, which was his book. When have you felt like you've worn garments of glory?
Thank you, Tybal.
I don't know if this is garments of glory, but all I know is that when I go to my daughter's every Shabbat, Friday afternoon, I'm very conscious of what I'm wearing. And because it's Shabbat, I want to look much better than I do on a Tuesday. And so I kind of dress up a little bit. And it's my Shabbos clothes that I probably wouldn't wear during the week, but I wear on Shabbat. And so in my own way, I'm feeling like I'm really ready to accept and bring in Shabbat. I don't think I'm going to wear, but they're my better clothing.
Other thoughts?
I can tell you when I was working construction very frequently, then one of the things I enjoyed a Saturday was the fact that I could get out of my field clothes, and I always felt better that I could put on, get cleaned up and put on at least a sport coat over my nice clean pressed shirt and feel refreshed in a different way. Just different. They gave me another sense of another sensation of being in a certain sense. Just by changing it's relating to what it says here, just changing my dirty, probably mud covered clothing or whatever, and then getting into something fresh and clean. And I was a new man.
All right, let's go on to the next verse. Norma, would you read this, please?
29, rouse yourself, for your light has come. Let the light rise up and glow. Awake, awake, utter songs of praise, for God's glory is revealed to your gaze. Context. This is the fifth verse of L'cha Dodi. The phrase hitari, kumi comes from Isaiah chapter 51, verse 17. The Haftorah for Parashat Shoftim, and one of the Haftorah of consolation between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. Uri, Shir Daberi comes from the Song of Deborah. Judges chapter 5, verse 12. La Kavod Adonai Alaik Nigla comes from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 5. The Haftorah for Parashat Vatkanan and the first Haftarah of consolation. The word Orik, your light, is the midpoint of this prayer with 65 words. You have to pull it up, David.
Sorry.
65 words before it and 65 words after it. This seems to suggest that Shabbat may bring light into our lives. Similarly, the words Uri, awake, awake, could be taken to urge us to spiritually wake up to see God's presence in the world. When has your light come?
I think there's always something joyful in singing.
I light up when I see my grandchildren.
I think whether I'm with someone or not, when I think of this song, it gives me joy and a reason for believing and going on. I don't know how else to express it. In any of its various versions.
I'll tell you a cute story about light. When Claudine and Dale Karonlick's younger girl, Sadie, was about 4 or 5, she used to like flashlights. So I had a really nice flashlight in the house that was little, and I gave it to her. And then in the middle of the night, she came into their bedroom and shined the flashlight in Dale and Claudine's faces. They weren't too happy with her for flashlights. She had a light of her own, that child. She still does. Sadie.
I see different times in different places when I'm many times in a natural setting. Something be very quiet and peaceful somewhere, and just the atmosphere or the color in the sky or the birds, or it could be something very impressing as far as some I can tell you either seeing parts of this water coming down in the Cascade Mountains and come melting off of the glacier there in Washington State, or just a beautiful sunset sometime in the right place.
Right.
Or they're smaller things. It's just the things that you have the sense of some spirituality there. And of course, the grandchildren, the right time. And sometimes not are the children. So I think if you can find it many places in many aspects of our lives, just if you're just open to it.
Right.
All right, next verse. Naomi, would you read this, please?
Do not be embarrassed. Do not be ashamed. Why are you downcast? Why do you moan? The poorest of your people, trust in this. The city will be rebuilt as in ancient days. Context. This is the 6th verse of L'cha Dodi. Many people switch tunes here. The phrase lo tevoshi velo tikalmi here is related to the phrase velo nevosh velo nikaleim in the Vahar Er Einenu section of Ahava Rabbah. It comes from Isaiah 54:4, the Haftarah for Parshat Ki Tetzeh, and one of the Haftarah of consolation between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. Is there a time when you have felt embarrassed or ashamed?
Who's going to be brave and admit that one?
Something to think about.
Well,
All
we
right.
learned why, 'cause I've always wondered why some chazans and song leaders switch the tunes for L'cha Dodi at verse, and now I really never knew that. Now that answered the question, so this is awesome. Thank you.
Okay, let's do one more, and then I'm going to switch into tour guide mode. Alan, would you read the 7th verse, please?
Sure. Your despoilers shall be despoiled. Your tormentors remove far away. God and you will celebrate together a bride and groom in joyful embrace. Context. This is the 7th verse of L'cha Dodi. Nothing more? That's it?
That's it.
Wow.
Okay. Have you ever experienced people getting their just rewards? Not enough.
That's kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Are we talking about good just rewards or bad just rewards?
Yeah, right.
Either.
I can remember one time driving down one of the main streets, going to visit a friend, and a car, absolutely crazy. I mean, there was traffic going down the wrong side of the street and zooming along. And when I came back from my girlfriend's house, the car was wrapped around a telephone pole.
Oh, whoa.
So that's why I say, you're talking about good just rewards or bad just rewards.
And maybe being embarrassed. Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna, recognizing the time, I'm going to show you what we have left in this source sheet, and then you can look at it on your own. So the 8th verse, there's a little bit of context about parrots and about spreading out left and right, and a pun that there's in here. The 9th verse is when we stand and face the door, bowing as we welcome the Sabbath bride that is symbolically entering at this point. There's a little note about difference in Sephardic versus Ashkenazi wording here. And question about experiencing peaceful Shabbat. And then there's a section about the music of L'cha Dodi. So L'cha Dodi does not have a traditional tune to it, except for the Friday night before Tisha B'Av, when it is done to Elei Tzion. Other than that, it is entirely up to Minhag Makom and the choices of the Shliach Tzibor, of the person leading services. So there are a huge number of tunes that are out there for this.
Yeah.
In not this past year, but the year before that, the Canons Assembly did a set of videos where they had one L'cha Dodi tune for every day of the Omer, which is 49 days. And then they had extra videos left over after that of tunes that they hadn't managed to fit in. So there are at least 49. Some tunes are written for L'cha Dodi, others are contrafactions from different songs. I happened to make up one that I used to lead services, so I'll sing it for you and we'll see if you can figure out where it comes from. Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad, Ishmeanu el hamiuchad, Adoshem echad u'shemo echad, L'shemo tiferet v'letila, L'cha Dodi, Likrat kala, P'nei Shabbat, Nekabela, L'cha Dodi, Likrat kala, P'nei Shabbat, Nekabela. Any sense of where that one's from?
It made me want to waltz, David.
Yes, that is Suddenly Seymour from Little Shop of Horrors. So I was in the car one day and I'm like, oh, that works really well with L'cha Dodi, and I led services with that once. So I have 9 videos in the source sheet, one for each verse of L'cha Dodi. There are a couple of the better known ones. Here's one of the Maccabees doing Hallelujah. Boi v'shalom ateret bala, gam b'simcha v'tzohala, and so on. And then there's one of the Ugandan Jews in their L'cha Dodi tune, and a link for the Moroccan Jews. And then there's a Karlbach tune or two, a Craig Todman tune, and a Debbie Friedman tune. And then finally an appendix with L'cha Dodi in 3 different translations.